I'm very pleased to be here today. I want to open with a statement concerning the significance of the temple, and then I'll get into the three entrance hymns which come from the Old Testament. The importance of the temple to the religious community can scarcely be exaggerated. Its significance to the modern reader may be seen by reviewing several statements regarding the Temple of Herod, or the Temple of Jerusalem, made by those who lived near the time of its existence or its destruction. The historian Josephus wrote much about his own regard for Herod's temple. On one occasion he stated, quote, "It is a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity," end quote. On another occasion, Josephus wrote that the temple was the most marvelous edifice which we have ever seen or heard of, whether we consider its structure, its magnitude, the richness of its every detail, or the reputation of its holy places, end quote. Finally, he wrote that the temple is the most pious and beautiful of all the buildings constructed in Palestine. The Jewish sages and rabbis shared the same sentiments, and they wrote much regarding the Temple of Jerusalem. To cite a couple of examples, a midrash concerning Abraham explains that God offered the entire world to Abraham, but the patriarch responded by saying, quote, "Unless you give me a temple, you have given me nothing," end quote. The rabbis bestowed extraordinary praise on the temple, itself an expression of the singular regard in which it was held. One well-known statement tells of the temple's extreme beauty. Quote, He who has not seen the temple has never seen a beautiful building," end quote. Another statement warned humanity not to pattern the family residence or the family courtyard or the family porch on the temple complex to maintain the temple's unique quality. A statement attributed to Rabbi Joshua ben Levi declares that if the nations of the world had known that the temple was a blessing to them, they would have built fortifications around it for protection against destruction. Why? Because the temple was a boon for all nations and not intended for Israel alone. One ancient source maintains that the temple's windows were not constructed to let the light of the sun into the building, but to permit the divine light within the temple to go out into the world. This accords with an old Jewish belief that during the creation, light was created from the place of the temple. Another source explains that the Jewish sages strengthened their oaths and their promises by swearing, quote, "by the temple." So I swear by the temple such and such, meaning that the temple with its authority and sanctity would add legitimacy to one's oath. The Latter-day Saints have likewise held their temples in great esteem. It may be significant that the first church buildings constructed in our era, consequent to the restoration of the gospel, were not ward chapels or stake centers, but temples. In connection with this, the prophet Joseph Smith taught that, quote, "The church is not fully organized in its proper order and cannot be until the temple is completed, where places will be provided for the administration of the ordinances of the priesthood," end quote. It is still evident more than a century and a half after the first temple was built in this dispensation that church leaders and lay members continue to alike to revere their temples. Church leaders continue to build temples, and church members continue to worship within these sacred buildings. That's my statement of significance. Now, I want to introduce to you three temple entrance hymns. Two are from the book of Psalms, and one is from Isaiah chapter 33. 4 verses in Isaiah 33. I should mention that the book of Psalms in our Psalter contains 150 psalms. Of these 150 psalms, approximately 35 deal directly with the ancient temple. I suspect some of these psalms were sung by the Levitical choir or by lay members in ancient Israel as they worshipped at the temple. Let's look at Psalms 15 and 24. These may be called temple entrance hymns or psalms or poems as they set forth the moral qualities of those who wish to enter the temple. It is well known that during the days of the Temple of Jerusalem, temple priests were required to heed certain threshold laws or gestures of approach, such as anointings, ablutions, vesting with sacred clothing, and sacrifices. What is less well known, however, is the requisition placed upon the temple visitors to subscribe to strict moral qualities. Such is the concern of Psalms 15 and 24, both of which are attributed to David. These psalms share the same literary structure and have similar literary elements. Each has a question that asks who may enter the temple, followed by a response listing the moral qualities that individuals must have in order to enter the temple, and conclude with a blessing that is reserved for those who enter the temple having fulfilled the moral requirements. First, Psalm 15. The question of Psalm 15 consists of two synonymous inquiries directed towards the temple's worshipers concerning their qualifications for admission into the sanctuary. The two questions. Lord, who shall dwell in thy tent? Who shall reside on thy holy mountain? A number of parallel terms are found in this parallelism. The pronoun who and the possessive pronoun your are each twice repeated. The verbs dwell and reside demonstrate the same idea, and the terms tent and mountain both refer to the temple. The tent refers to the sacred portable temple used by the Israelites during their sojourn in the wilderness. And there are many scriptures that parallel mountain with temple. I will not review those at this time. Who then may dwell in the Lord's temple? The response from the same psalm. I'm just a little, I want to make sure you have the same text. He who walks, so who may dwell in the temple? Here's the response. Notice it has 10 response, 10 parts that we'll note in a moment. He who walks with integrity and works righteousness and speaks truth in his heart, who has not tripped upon his tongue, who has not done evil to his neighbor and has not lifted up a reproach against his relative. The reprobate in his eyes is despicable, but those who fear the Lord he will honor. He has sworn to do no evil, and he will not falter. His money he has not given in interest, nor has he taken a bribe against the innocent. Note the synonymous terms used here. The poet speaks of one's moral posture in terms of walking, tripping, faltering, and being unmovable. The poet speaks of integrity, righteousness, truth. He mentions explicitly the heart, tongue, eyes, and through implication, he speaks of feet. Notice walks and tripped. He speaks of hands. Notice lifted up. And he speaks of the mouth. Notice the words speaks and sworn. Such indicates that the whole person, i.e. the whole life, is involved in preparing for entrance into the temple. Verse 3 identifies three negative commands, each possessing the negation not. The three are similar in content, dealing with the temple participants' relationship with humankind. The three sentences are more or less antithetical expressions of verse 2. To speak truth, verse 2, is the same as not tripping upon the tongue or speaking slanderous things about someone. One who works righteousness is one who does no evil to a neighbor nor mocks his relative. Further, verse 2 spoke of walking with integrity, a statement that stands opposite to the idea of tripping over the tongue. The concept seems apparent. The righteous walks with integrity, but evil persons trip and fall. The response comprises a listing of qualifications of those who are worthy and therefore permitted to enter the sacred domain. The qualifications form a 10-part structure consisting of 3 positive requirements, followed by 3 negative conditions, then 2 additional positive requirements, and finally 2 more negative conditions. The negative statements point to the omission of sinful acts, and the positive statements refer to the commission of righteous acts. By way of comparison, both negative and positive commandments served an important role in the Mosaic Law, and the sacrificial offerings were performed for both sins of omission and sins of commission. The usage of the number 10 may be deliberate on the part of the author, for when used symbolically, 10 denotes wholeness and completeness. And several scholars have compared these 10 to the 10 Commandments, both of which can be counted or memorized and counted by on your fingers. 1 item per finger is what one scholar has suggested. Now, this is the blessing. He who does these things will not be moved forever. The blessing summarized in a single sentence promises, he who does these things, i.e. the 5 positive statements, and does not do the 5 negative statements, will not be moved forever. The expression, be moved forever, speaks of those who are permitted to reside in the Lord's temple forever. Such was the promise outlined in Revelation 3:12, where the righteous are told that, quote, he that overcometh I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, end quote. Compare also Psalm 5:5, which states that the evil cannot stand in the Lord's presence. Now let's look at Psalm 24. This has a structure similar to Psalm 15, as I noted. However, Psalm 24 adds 2 parts, a prologue that pertains to earth creations, verses 1 and 2, and a statement that pertains to the identification of God, verses 7 through 10. The 2 questions read, so again, 2 questions. Who shall ascend into the mountain of the Lord, and who shall rise up in his holy place? The parallel elements in this structure are as follows. The interrogative who is twice repeated. The term ascend of line 1 parallels with rise up of line 2, and mountain of the Lord corresponds with his holy place. The response to these 2 questions is brief. Here is the response. So who can go to the temple? He whose palms are innocent and whose heart is pure, who has not lifted his soul to falsehood and has not sworn what is false. A list of moral qualities identifying the person who may enter the sanctuary follows the 2 questions. The moral qualities are presented in 4 lines. The first 2 lines present positive statements. He who has innocent palms and a pure heart. The second 2 lines present negatives. He who does not possess vanity nor swears falsely. The blessing designed for those who enter the temple with innocent palms and a pure heart is also composed of 4 lines. And here's the blessing. I quote from Psalm 24. He shall lift up a blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the circle, or I think King James reads generation, of them that inquire of thee, that seek thy face, O God of Jacob. Those who possess the moral qualities listed in verse 4 will receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from God. This blessing will include the privilege of beholding the face of God once the righteous individual enters God's presence in heaven. The context or setting of these 2 temple entrance hymns, Psalms 15 and 24, is unknown. It seems clear that they pertain to Solomon's temple and perhaps to all of God's temples that have been built in various dispensations of the gospel. Scholars have advanced several theories regarding the 2 hymns. The 3 most prominent theories are, and I'll just summarize these. Number 1, Some scholars, especially a German branch of scholars, have suggested that a priest would stand at the temple gate and ask the questions, who can go to the temple? And the visitors would respond with the response in Psalm 15 or Psalm 24. Or another twist to this is the temple visitor would approach the gate and say, who can go into the temple? And then the priest would respond by listing the response. That's theory number one of how these psalms were used anciently. Theory number two is this. An Israeli scholar by the name of Weinfeld has suggested that on the temple gates there was a list of requirements of who could enter the temple. On the temple gates or the post of the temple or somewhere of the ancient temple. He has no evidence for this other than citing Egyptian and Greek temples, some of which had a list of requirements of who may enter the temple. Theory number three of how these were used, and the theory that I like the best, is these psalms were sung as part of a choir, probably by the Levites in the temple. Psalm 150 lists the musical items used anciently, for example. So we know that some of their musical items, and we know that some of these psalms were sung anciently, sung to music and so on. So those are the three theories. Now I'm going to go to a poem from Isaiah 33 and look at this. This passage may not have been a hymn, and you'll see it relates structurally to the first two psalms, but it has the same structure. Two parallel questions, a response, and a blessing. This passage of Isaiah can also be identified as a temple entrance poem, but it points to entrance of righteous individuals into the temple of heaven, or the celestial kingdom. So see, this is different. The other two temple entrance hymn speaks of the temple on earth, the temple of Solomon, and so on. The section begins with two parallel rhetorical questions, asking who can dwell with God in his fire. These are followed by a response to the questions detailing the attributes of one who is able to dwell with God, which in turn is succeeded by a description of the blessings of those who will be privileged to dwell with God. First, I will read the two questions. Who among us shall dwell with devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? The two questions are parallel. The first 6 words of line 1 are repeated in line 2. Who among us shall dwell with? The expression devouring fire of line 1 corresponds with the expression everlasting burnings of line 2. The words devouring fire and everlasting burnings refer to the dwelling place of God, the celestial kingdom, or the temple in heaven. Joseph Smith taught, quote, some shall rise to the everlasting burnings of God, for God dwells in everlasting burnings, end quote. He also taught, quote, God Almighty himself dwells in eternal fire. Flesh and blood cannot go there, for all corruption is devoured by the fire. Our God is a consuming fire. Immortality dwells in everlasting burnings, end quote. Isaiah's two questions ask who will be able to abide the devouring fire of the Lord's glory. He answers these questions in verse 15. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. Isaiah sets forth 6 statements to describe the qualities of one who will inherit and receive the glories of the celestial kingdom. Isaiah then sets forth 6 statements to describe the blessings of those who will inherit the celestial kingdom. So now the next one. Thank you. He shall dwell on high. So this is the list of the blessings. He shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the stronghold of rocks. Bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. they shall behold the land that is very far off. The words he shall dwell refers back to the parallel questions. Who among us shall dwell? On high speaks of heaven, as does the final phrase of the blessing, the land that is very far off. The words bread and water, sacramental in nature, pertain to the atonement of Christ. They also relate to heaven, whose inhabitants will be immortal and never want for water or bread, as these will be sure. The phrase, the King in his beauty, speaks of the Lord in his glory and eternal nature. My conclusion: 3 scriptural passages share an identical structural form: Psalm 15, Psalm 24, and Isaiah 33, verses 14 through 16. The first 2 are hymnic in nature and pertain to temples on earth. The third is prophetic in nature and pertains to the heavenly temple or to heaven itself. All 3 have direct application to us living in this dispensation. We may read these 3 temple entrance poems and ask, who of us is worthy to enter our temples? Who of us may dwell in the house of the Lord? The answer: he who walks with righteousness and who works righteousness and speaks truth in his heart. He whose palms are innocent and whose heart is pure. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly. May we strive for moral worthiness in all things and be found worthy to enter the house of the Lord, and consequently receive the many glorious blessings that await for us there. This is my prayer in the sacred name of Jesus Christ. Amen.